Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that will help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid. This is my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hi.
How you doing, man? What's going on?
Well, I thought I'd start with the $40 billion, most of which is going to be wasted, the government is spending on broadband. But first, let me give you a story that's much more fun.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see the Elon Musk Mark Zuckerberg fight story?
No, I just heard an allusion to it. It sounds kind of fantastic. What's the deal?
It may be real. Elon Musk, in his usual obnoxious way, presumably joking, challenged Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook to a cage wrestling match, unlimited wrestling, or whatever they call it.
Mm-hmm.
That was assumed to be a joke till a couple of days later. Zuckerberg said, "Bring it on. I've been studying jujitsu, and if you look at my blog, you'll see me with the ribbons I won at a tournament. Let's do it."
Wow.
That that was about a
That's
week.
that's pretty funny. I certainly would have thought of Zuckerberg as a milquetoast guy, but I guess milquetoast guys can study jujitsu too. Why not, huh?
I think they need it more than anyone else.
Yeah.
They need
Hmm.
confidence in that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So if some of us will go like this, which I need to do because I've been falling over and need all the strength.
Hmm.
But I was lucky. I was born strong, so I didn't have to worry about it that much.
Dave is lifting weights for those of you who are not looking, but just listening to our broadcast as he
Yeah.
talks about working out. Mark
Uh,
Zuckerberg and Elon Musk in a cage fight. Now that would be pretty hilarious.
yeah. And over the years, I've known a lot of people, including a lot of short people who would have been bullied and teased in many circumstances,
Hmm.
learning how to do self defense and going up to black belt level. I had a cousin
Hmm.
who did just that. So they're both arrogant, obnoxious, uh, chauvinistic, and their companies show it. They're also both some of the smartest in the business, and I don't think you can deny their success.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, it's pretty clear now that there may be, I don't know, 1,000, 10,000 people who are really smart like these two and also are really aggressive to build a company.
Hmm.
And the difference between these two and the folks who haven't done it is mostly luck,
Yeah.
according to
Yeah.
what the economists are saying.
Hmm.
Nothing to take away from what they've achieved. But anybody succeeding, very much luck is part of it, almost always.
Hmm.
Starting with the color of the skin you're born with.
I was gonna say luck and circumstance. I know a lot of really smart folks, guys and gals, who come up with stuff, but because of what they look like and their background, they just don't get the opportunity that other folks do.
Well, it goes beyond that. There's also a lot of white males, middle class background, who don't get the opportunity.
Hmm.
Then the people that we know that become the front page headlines in the business press, the main difference between them and 100 or 1,000 other people is they were lucky.
Hmm.
Mark happened to be at Harvard at the right time and took on two partners who did a lot of the work. Uh, Chad Hurley made the better part of $1 billion on YouTube. But do you think Chad Hurley and YouTube, he sold it to Google for 2.3 billion, as I recall. Do you think Chad Hurley was the best businessman and the most creative engineer around video? I was there at the time.
I don't know him, but I seriously doubt that. It generally is not the best and the brightest, but like you said, it's the luckiest, right place, right time. Circumstances are just kind of coalescing.
And I knew a fellow who built YouTube under a different name, 3 years before YouTube. He was doing the video. He had all the plans and the ideas. You could post all your videos. But the problem was at that point, nobody had broadband, or next to nobody had broadband.
Mm-hmm.
So when you put it on your screen, you would get something that was the size of a playing card, if you were lucky.
Mm-hmm.
And it costs much more for him to run the company. His bandwidth costs were much higher then. Why did Chad Hurley succeed? Well, he wasn't, the French were there too. And everybody thinks that the second most successful video showing, which is Daily Motion out of France, copied him. But it turns out Daily Motion started a month before YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
They just weren't as tough businessmen.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be there wasn't such a large audience for French-speaking people. Now, there's not going to be a shortage of broadband. There's no shortage of broadband now. 85% of the country have good broadband, or at least, yeah, good enough for almost all practical purposes. This digital divide stuff, there are some people in some places, somewhere between 5 and 10% of the country, and maybe another 5% who are too poor to get broadband because the prices keep going up and up.
Isn't that crazy, Dave? I mean, that is so counterintuitive. I know you've talked on and on over the last few years, and I've experienced it too, just in my business life, that the cost of broadband has plummeted dramatically if you are a wholesaler. And yet on the retail end, we haven't seen that.
It's been going up every year. The result is that Comcast in the last 10 years has gone up from $40 to $70. In order to avoid political opposition, they just do a few percent every year.
Mm-hmm.
But they and Charter, the number two, and between them they have 70% of the country, every year raises prices. Although I'm in the industry, I know what's happening. I know what equipment costs. I know what bandwidth costs. And it's been going down consistently for the last 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Price has been going up.
Mm-hmm.
What should be done about it? Well, Joe Biden brought in a whole lot of people from the FCC, from the Senate, from the community to announce that we're going to spend $40 billion on broadband. And there's nothing in that to make sure, and he said, it will be affordable. The plans that came out for this broadband summer, half of which is going to be wasted, had no provision to make the prices affordable. None at all.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the legislation that got through Congress said they can't regulate prices.
Mm-hmm.
And all the battles over net neutrality were really battles over the power of the FCC, because Comcast was afraid that somebody in Washington would notice they have been ripping off 40 million American homes for 15 years with prices that are twice as high as most of Europe, with the same equipment and the same wage costs,
Mm-hmm.
and do something about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think the first person who said they'd do something about it was George Bush the first, who in, I think, 2007, before he ran, no, 2003, before he ran for re-election, said he would bring affordable broadband to all Americans. And since then, the price has gone up and up and up slowly, but it's doubled and tripled in many
Mm-hmm.
places.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that there ought to be a law. It ought not to be acceptable. We know we're not going to solve that problem by getting a little bit more competition, because to actually have competition work its miracles, you really need 4 to 7 players.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they look at each other and say, well, they don't say it, they go public, they make a speech on Wall Street. I think this year we shouldn't go for more subscribers. we should go for more profitable subscribers and raise our rates.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a week later, or actually 2 hours later, often at the same conference,
Yeah, harump all around.
yeah, AT and Verizon,
Mm-hmm.
one would be first, and the other would come literally at the same conference the
Mm-hmm.
next day, keynoting the next day in the morning, and say the same thing. And that was their way of telling each other, let's get together to raise prices without getting together because there are laws about antitrust.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's where it's going on. Now, there is one good positive thing for most of us, although it's not working very well. It's the ACP, the Affordable Computer Program, that they managed to squeeze in to all the stuff, the infrastructure bills, and so
Mm-hmm.
on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the
It is a
Affordable
very
Connectivity
good
Program.
program.
Mm-hmm.
It allows $30 to anybody who qualifies, and the qualifications were relatively generous, twice the poverty level. That's something like $47,000 for a family of four. That's not absolute poverty, but it's people who sure
Mm-hmm.
can use the help. And they made it real easy to sign up, and 13 million people have signed up. And that because it was part of all the pandemic spending, is set to die next year. I think that it's going to be renewed because, among other things, when Jessica Rosenworcel of the FCC and other folks went to Congress to testify about that this week, uh, several of the Republicans said, we need this program. We have to make sure every kid can connect to schools if the schools are closed. I brought to the show some comments from the guy who was running the NTIA for Trump,
Mm-hmm.
who said, yes, we have to find a way to solve this. This is a real problem, and so on.
Well, that's
So,
encouraging, Dave. That it's not
yeah,
just totally split along partisan lines.
yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
it's likely to survive. And Jessica is doing, and I can call her Jessica. I've known her for 20 years, although I haven't spoken to her in years. Uh, very smart politics. Not merely is she being nice to the Republicans and going to their states to promote the program that the US government is doing. Here is your senator, thank him, even if he voted against the spending in the first place. They've gone way above the projections, and they were 13 million or 17 million after a year. About 40 something million, i.e., a third of the homes in America will qualify. She also was lying and encouraging everybody else to lie.
Really?
I Yeah, the Los Angeles Times and this ob- obscure broadband writer in New York pointed out
Mm-hmm.
that while the program was a good program helping people who needed the money, it's $360 a year, and anybody in low income can use that $360 a year. It was totally failing at what they said it was going to do, which was get people to connect to broadband.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's and she this came up about 4 or 5 months ago, and I screamed bloody hell to her answering machine. I didn't catch her, and I didn't need to because she knew the issue as well as I did. And the Los Angeles Times picked it up, but the Times and the Washington Post today, writing it up, said that this was going to help close the digital divide and bring people online. Now, we had Scott Walston. He's the best economist working on telecom in Washington, also an old friend on the show. What did he tell us about how practical it was to reach the 5 to 10% of the US who don't have broadband, even though it's available for them.
Well, as I recall, Dave, what he said was that simply decreasing the price or subsidizing the cost was not going to make it happen. There were so many other factors that were retarding adoption of broadband by low-income and underserved communities that unless those factors were addressed, you weren't going to close the digital divide.
And
And I happen to agree with them, just from my experience.
the 42 billion includes 2.5 billion to for what they call digital equity and bringing people online. So if they turned around, they had a program that was going to get free broadband to everybody in every New York City housing project, which they do now in New York using the ACP we just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
How would you get the people who haven't signed up to sign up?
How would I
You've
do
been
it?
out in the community.
Well, that my group, the Smart Community Initiative and Digital Divide Partners, has been working for many years in low income and public housing communities throughout New York City and all the boroughs. And what we've learned is that, until the folks on the ground have some ownership in the process, until they are involved in actually defining how the broadband is used with applications and services that have some meaning for them, it's not going to have any impact. At the end of the day, just throwing free broadband at poor folks, when they wake up the next morning, they're still going to be poor. So, and unless you have some applications, some services, and quite frankly, some ownership in the way that this stuff gets rolled out and used, I don't see any a significant increase, or I should say decrease, in the digital divide. I just don't see it.
Well, when Scott looked at it, he said that there are fewer and fewer people you're going to be able to reach because what's left is the hardcore who really don't need it, really don't want it, maybe drug addicts or illiterate. And these are the people, many, those who are in extreme poverty, people living in the shelters and just getting out of it and barely finding a way to meet their rent when they get out of the shelter, are the ones you have to reach. And I absolutely guarantee you, almost none of the programs, which are going to go state by state, is going to do much about that at all. Mm-hmm. Because I've read their proposals. They all talk about how, we have to involve the community, we have to involve the stakeholders, and find some usually middle class or government bureaucrats to come out and say the right things, the nice things. Now, it may be a good thing that under Joe Biden, they're going to come up, they're going to spend $1 billion to train, I don't know, 10,000 community organizers. Because most of the people who jump into this are not political hacks, although there are a lot of poverty tips coming in. And that may be a good thing, but it's not going to get people connected. And it is a good thing for the last 5%, maybe 7%, that don't have any connection. Where are most of those people who can't get a connection if they wanted it?
You say they can't get it if they wanted it, or they can't.
There's no wire to their home.
Well, I said that's probably not in the urban areas. That's probably in the rural areas, which is another conundrum. In that I know you've talked about extensively about all the money that's being thrown through this program and others at the rural communities, where some of whom just do not have physical access, regardless of price, to high-speed internet.
And it turns out most of them are in the Black Belt, the rural South, and Appalachia. Mm-hmm. Because Bell South and I guess it was Frontier who served those areas were way behind rolling out stuff. And the cable companies, that was the last place they wanted to go. That's where you're going to have to get things to happen. And it's not going to happen by intelligent, well meaning, honorable folks, several of them we had on this show over the last 2 years, sitting in Washington and talking about how to do it. It's not going to happen much at all because it's really hard for the last few. And it horrifies me because I know that of the $40 billion, at least half is going to be misspent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dave, I just want to take issue with one point that you just raised in terms of some of the hardcore that remain unconnected. It's not just the incarcerated and the folks that have drug issues. It's also a regular low-income folks that just don't see a need for the broadband. They are not plugged into the broadband ecosystem. And until you show them a reason why they need it, they're not going to spend, even if that $30 is available, they're not going to spend that if they don't have a reason to. And to me, that's one of the big missing pieces in all this digital inclusion, all this digital education, is that we need more services and applications that are designed by and for low-income folks. Excuse me, that speak to their needs. I mean, just being able to go online is not going to help folks who don't have a job, who have limited resources. It's not going to help improve their life significantly. You got to really bring them application services and things that are on the internet that are going to really impact them directly. And just throwing the broadband at
How
them
many
doesn't
of
do
them are between 14 years old and 40 years old?
What? Say it again. What about it?
How many of the people who may not be interested today are between 14 years old and 40 years
I
old?
say few. I say most of them are younger and older. That'd be my assessment.
We can start with just about everybody between 14 and 40, because in almost every community in this country, you can't get a date if they can't look up your Facebook page.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why literally 80% of the US has a Facebook page.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's back to my point. You have the kids, all the kids have smartphones. And if we count that as broadband, okay, that's one thing. But to me, social media and what you do on your phone is a limited experience. And there's so much more possible. But until we explore, put the tools in people's hands to explore that, I think it's going to be truncated.
And one of the things that came up in the White House presentation that was mostly everybody congratulating themselves on spending a lot of money, not congratulating themselves on getting a lot done, was that, yes, you can't put a broadband line in there and not make sure they have a computer to connect it to.
Mm-hmm.
What they were also saying, you're really going to fail if you're not able to train people. And they have a well-meaning program they call Digital Navigators. But it turns out that nearly every one of the programs that try to train people on computers has failed miserably. There have been loads of programs in libraries, YMCAs, Riverside Parks, amphitheater here near me, that gave free training for years. And they were all begging for people to come because we haven't found a way to reach the people with giving them a reason, just like you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying it wouldn't be great to do it, but I'm also saying, by and large, these programs have failed because we don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
even legitimate community-based programs,
Hmm.
more often than not fail because we don't know how to do it. We
Yeah.
know how to hire a teacher or a digital equity supervisor and pay them, well, a lot more money than the people they're trying to reach. And in some places, they're going to go out to the community and try to find the people who can relate. But it's very, very hard to relate, and it's very, very hard to make it so. Well, let's go to some good news before
Yeah,
we
well,
take
let me just quickly just to summarize that. I would say my conclusion on that, Dave, is that as long as the solutions are top down and paternalistic, they're not going to work until the people on the ground themselves are funded and in charge of the solutions. Not going to change. But before we go to the good news, Dave, we're at the halfway point already. We got to take a break.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
when we come back, again and again on this show, I've been talking about medical breakthroughs because there have been so many.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we've been talking about what's starting to happen in artificial intelligence.
Okay.
That gives us plenty to talk about after the break.
Excellent. Okay. You're listening to Community Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid on WHCR 90.3 FM. Stay tuned. We're going to take a brief break and be right back. Right back. Okay. Thanks. All Okay, we're back. Community Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid on WHCR 90.3 FM. Hey, Dave, I know there's a lot going on in the medical arena that you wanted to bring to our listeners and viewers. What's the latest breakthrough?
I have been utterly amazed by how much progress has happened in the last 10 years in medicine, and it's just getting more and more. And there are lots of places you can learn about what's going on, starting with the Times and going to the New England Journal. But I wanted to bring it here because I know most people don't know what's going on, and don't know how to take advantage of it. That's why I keep coming back to the medical improvements, the fact that the 15 years ago, half the people with breast cancer died, and now it's down to 1 out of 5. Not all cures, not everything, but enormous progress, and the techniques that they're using are likely to keep making progress, including the artificial intelligence we'll be talking about. The first one, Stu, do you remember Jerry's Kids?
I certainly do. That's Jerry Lewis. He used to have TV marathons for kids that had muscular dystrophy and quite successfully raised a lot of money. And is it starting to pay off?
Well, until recently, it paid off with finding a few things that let people live a little bit longer. How you could pat, no, not pat, hit somebody on the back to clear their lungs and things like that for cystic fibrosis and so on. That is now changed. The first legitimate therapy that looks like it can cure Duchenne muscular dystrophy, the most common, has just been approved by the FDA. That's something that I've been hoping for all my life. And that kind of thing is happening.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the Jerry Lewis telethons that must go back 50 years easy, right? I mean, so
I
that
think
battle has been waged for a long time, trying to find some cures to that.
yeah, I think they kept going to about 2010. And I
Hmm.
remember when I was a little boy.
Hmm.
And Jerry would bring it. Jerry knew everybody in Hollywood, including the Frank Sinatras and the Dean Martins and all the stars. And they'd all come on the telethon and they'd perform. And so you wanted to watch it. And they raised one year over $20 million.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of treatments that improved the life for the kids, but nothing that looked like a cure. What is now hit is called Elevidus. It comes from Sarepta Therapeutics, and it is a CAR T, uh, CAR T cells that can induce the body to produce the dystrophin protein, which is absent in the people with most forms of muscular dystrophy.
This is a gene therapy, right, Dave? It's a
It
genetic
is absolute
approach.
gene
Mm-hmm.
therapy. It's just starting to get out there. Gene therapy in general, until 10 years ago, there was almost none because it was working really well in animals. But enough people died in the first trials 20 years ago that
Mm-hmm.
they were moving very, very cautiously. You now can probably cure sickle cell and everything else you've ever thought of is moving ahead. What is the gene therapy? Well, we know that the DNA makes RNA and tells our body which makes proteins, and that's what determines most of what goes on in our body. DNA has, I don't know how many billion, I think 3 billion base pairs. And if one of those gets mutated in the wrong way, terrible things can happen,
Mm-hmm.
like sickle cell, muscular dystrophy, and a whole lot of cancers. What has now come out is what's called CRISPR, which is a way to use various enzymes to break open your DNA and insert what you need. In this case, they insert what will make a gene for dystrophin. It's not clear how long it's going to work and how well it's going to work because it's only been happening the last 2 years. But they're able to measure how much of the protein that was distorted or was being produced by the 4 and 5-year-olds they give this treatment to. Mm-hmm. 2 years later, they're often producing. It's not perfect. It's got a way to go. But many of them are producing what the body needs and doing better. And the odds are that will continue because it's not just sending you an antibiotic to get rid of a virus. Of course, antibiotics don't do viruses, to get rid of the bacteria. It is actually changing your genes. That is the kind of thing that was science fiction until recently.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, if somebody you know had a kid with muscular dystrophy, how could they get help on something that's just hitting the market, that is just coming out of trials?
Probably get associated with one of the universities that's running these trials. I know last week you had mentioned there's a website that lists trials that are going on. Maybe you could talk about that again, Dave, for our listeners.
Clinicaltrials.gov, which showed you, for example, there are now some Alzheimer's treatments, and we talked about them on the show before. They're monoclonal antibodies, and one of them, dramatically in the Times, it's mid-level trials, 700 people. Half got the drug, half didn't. And those who got the drug deteriorated 35% less than the people who didn't. Mm-hmm. That was dramatic enough. The FDA is moving to just put it on the market. Mm-hmm. But if this was 2 months ago, there would have been no way you could get it without getting into one of the trials. A good doctor knows what's going on. Many of the good doctors are at universities. Some really good doctors are out in Brooklyn helping poor people. I mentioned Iris Davis here on the air, who inspired me back when I was doing the age reporting. She was first in her class in medical school. Mm-hmm. She was working at a clinic in Brooklyn. She's telling me, my people are dying. And that was what she chose to do, when she could have gone anywhere. So the drug for Duchenne muscular dystrophy has just been approved. It may be a few months before it can really go. There's going to be a war between the company who's going to want to charge unbelievable amounts of money. Some of this stuff is coming out at $100,000 and even $500,000 and $2 million. And the insurance companies and the other people pay for it. But it's been done, and it's probably going to be done much better as these techniques goes. Now, the other one is a dramatic story from the Times of a lady who was diagnosed 10 years ago with breast cancer and was told she had less than a year to live. She got into a trial, and it turned out the drug in the trial really helped her. Mm-hmm. And for 2 or 3 years, she was basically in remission. Like most cancer drugs, the cancer mutates and the drugs stop working. But then she was able to go to another drug. These drugs are coming out so fast and so many that there was another one she could try, and it gave her another 2 years. It's 10 years in. She has now doing fine and is going into a trial of CRISPR gene edited CAR T cells.
So this is more genetic therapy.
That's more genetic therapy.
Hmm. I
Stuff
mean,
like this.
is that the overall trend that we're starting to see in
It's
treating these
only
really
one of them.
pernicious diseases?
It's a miracle.
Hmm.
But so are monoclonal antibodies. I had a friend who showed up with COVID a while back. And
Showed up
I
with
said,
what, Dave?
showed up with COVID a while
Okay.
back.
Uh-huh.
And I said, go talk to a good doctor because there's a drug called Paxlovid that seems to be really helping. It cut the death rate in half in some if they got it at the right time and the right people. Uh, that was a monoclonal antibody. Monoclonals are all over medicine now. They
Hmm.
started hitting the market 8 years ago, and they're being used in a dozen different types of cancer and a whole lot of other things. As I said, it may be able to reduce burden of Alzheimer's. Very early, 400 people did somewhat better than the 400 people who didn't get it. That's encouraging. That's no guarantee of anything.
Hmm.
Monoclonal antibodies are fairly straightforward. You find somebody who is naturally producing an antibody, and you take it into the lab and you clone it.
Hmm.
And you make billions of copies of that antibody that works and start giving them to people who aren't able to produce that antibody, can't produce enough of that antibody. Uh, this worked on animals 20 years ago, a couple of Nobel Prizes for it. The CRISPR lady also got the Nobel Prize and never has been more deserved. And it's being used again and again in all kinds of different things. The takeaway for everybody in the audience is incredible things are happening in medicine. I've been, the stuff I'm telling you is from the New England Journal and the New York Times and the FDA and so on.
Hmm.
And it's pretty reliable, but all this is brand new. It's sometimes hard to get. It's sometimes unclear what to do. Sometimes unclear what your choice is. So clinicaltrials.gov is very useful. And a good doctor, usually tied into a university, you really want to have if you don't want somebody who's been practicing for 40 years, is about to retire, and doesn't bother to read the New England Journal.
Right. Hmm. Doing it
And
the
there's
same way
some
he did it
doctors
40
who are,
years ago. And so much is happening.
now, some doctors who've been doing it for 40 years and about the time keep right up with it. In fact, I had a cardiologist until recently who has retired, so I can't see him anymore.
Hmm.
And he was on top of everything.
Hmm.
Uh, and he was on the verge of retirement. So there's
Hmm.
it doesn't not all the good doctors are in the universities, but get a good doctor,
Yeah.
period. Now, can I tell you the most ridiculous, amusing thing that's going on in computers these days?
Yeah, love to hear
Elon Musk, who is doing a lot of AI stuff, but you know him from Tesla and for SpaceX,
it. And
was,
Twitter.
I'm sorry?
And Twitter. Don't forget he's the Twitter guy
Oh,
now.
oh, I do want to forget that Twitter guy. My Twitter keeps getting errors and having problems.
Yeah.
And and there's a lot of hateful stuff that is
Yeah.
going through Twitter because they're not doing so
No
good a job.
moderation.
It's not no, but they fired an awful lot of the moderators.
Hmm.
Okay, very bright businessman, incredibly successful. He deserves lots of applause for what he's done. Well, he was complaining. I think it was some comment Bill Gates made about what was going on in artificial intelligence. And Musk has put a few $100 million into artificial intelligence. It's not like he's not following stuff. And so he said, Bill Gates, I challenge you to an unlimited cage wrestling match. You know, like the World Wide Wrestling Games.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was probably a joke. Uh, he doesn't have any experience. And to everybody's amazement, a few days later, Bill Gates, and we're talking about two of the five richest people in the world, and they're not young. Gates, I think, is 39 now. No, it's got to be older than that.
Come on, Gates or Zuckerberg?
Gates is older than 30. I
Gates
think
has
I
got to
said,
be in the 670s or so, right? I mean,
no,
that was back in
no.
1980. When he started doing this thing.
Yeah. And Musk is in his 50s.
Yes.
So it's not likely to be a very good fight. But
Uh,
Gates said, Elon, I'll take you up on it. I've been learning jujitsu. And I actually got a ribbon at the last tournament that I went to. And in fact, he blogged with the picture of him holding the ribbon
mhm.
at a jiu-jitsu tournament. Now, that's not a black belt, but he said, bring it on. And one of the people in the business said if the two of them did it, there'd be 25 million people signing into pay-per-view and it would make $1 billion. It's probably not going to happen. They're probably going to decide it's a joke.
Fun
But
to talk about, though.
they're talking, I say,
Now,
uh,
now, now, Dave, you mentioned that speaking of dueling battles between intellectual heavyweights, you mentioned something about a debate between a couple of the AI heavyweights about the dangerous pros and cons of AI. What's that about?
possibly the most important advancement in AI is convolutional neural networks that were introduced about 12 years ago in a paper by Jan LeCun of NYU, Jeffrey Hinton of the University of Toronto, and Bagnio, whose first name I don't get. Totally unexpected, found ways to do them much more efficiently, which brought the cost down enough, and it's inside almost it's inside all the large language models, which is not all of what AI is about. Some of the most important work, there was a Nobel Prize for this stuff. They would have gotten it. They won every other prize that there is, ACM and so on. Well, Jeffrey, I shouldn't call him Jeffrey, I've never met him, Hinton, along with the top person at Google DeepMind, and yeah, about 120 of the best AI scientists said, let this be a warning to the world. We don't know whether when AIs get smarter than human beings, they're going to keep us around. Now, my gut says that it might work out that way. It's an edge-of event. And the odds are quite long against it, is what my gut says. But these guys are much more qualified. Well, Hinton was leading the people warning. Sam Altman also of ChatGPT and OpenAI was right out front in public. But LeCun said, this is nonsense. We're going to find when we build the stuff, we're going to find ways to keep it under control. There's a few thousand people in the world working on that problem, and they're going to solve it. Well, they're old friends, so they had a very friendly debate a few days ago on both sides of this. Now, I'm sick and tired of this because I've read the work from both of them. I actually signed the petitions. Anybody could sign. And I don't know if there's much more to say, but that's the division amongst not the pundits in the New York Times. That's the division between the best scientists in the world. Incidentally, LeCun is still an NYU professor, but he spends most of his time running all the AI for Facebook. Hinton, who's now 75, was very senior at Google. He resigned from Google because he wanted to say, there is this problem, and he didn't want to embarrass his employer. Now he's 75, has made millions, was time to retire for most people. So it's not that great a sacrifice, but he chose to resign from a very prestigious and well-supported job at Google in order to bring a warning to the world. I bet you don't know where the phrase, let this be a warning to the world, comes from. It wasn't used by these guys.
I certainly don't, but I've been hearing it for decades, so it's got to go way back. Where'd it come from, Dave?
First reporter who got into Hiroshima.
Wow.
He got to Tokyo, took a train, and I don't know how he did the last few miles, and he actually got to Hiroshima, saw what was going on, saw that the government, as usual, were lying, and wrote, let this be a warning to the world. Now, more good things. How much time do I have?
Got about 2 minutes, Dave, and then we got to wrap it up.
2 minutes. Okay. This week was a big show, and everybody was there in the field with the latest, greatest stuff. Some of the things you're seeing in photorealistic images, unbelievable. Voice, 60 seconds of your voice, and they can reproduce it. And the Wall Street Journal reporter who tried it fooled her own mother. Video is starting to happen. Right now, it looks like animation, and they can do photorealistic video. Still not really there. But you can take a picture of a dog and have it start walking just like a dog would walk. Perfectly fine video. That's all coming. Last thing. I'm going through a book that is very ambitious. It's the textbook that comes out of Berkeley and Stanford. It's just called Artificial Intelligence. It's used by over 1,000 universities. It is not an easy read. It's going to take me a long time, and some of the math I don't know if I ever could understand. But what it's teaching me is that this stuff is doing incredible things. We know that because we're seeing the results, and is incredibly hard. Really impressive. The book is much better than you'd think from a 1,900-page textbook, because they put in all the history.
Wow.
The folks who wrote it were in the middle of all this stuff for the last 30 years, know all of what was going on, and have a sense of humor. But it's still not a light thing. So watch next week. I promise 2 things. I'll bring you a couple of other books, one of which is not so challenging, 2 of which are not so challenging. And I will have a pile of examples of how good the video and pictures and illustrations are getting. The only way for you're not going to, I can't bring them to the radio, but I'll have them, and I'll have links with the best examples I can.
Okay. Well, we are so fortunate to have Dave Burstein here with us, who's reading these 1,900-page tomes and coming back to us with something that we maybe can comprehend to some degree about some of the latest stuff going on.
All you have to comprehend is that now you can make a photorealistic picture of your grandfather with it from a faded 80-year-old photo and have it look good. You can make a video of a dog walking. You can fake out everybody with a voice of, sure, you could put Barack Obama's voice there.
And I'm sure that's just the tip of the iceberg.
And that's the thing to take away, that it has lots of problems. It often makes errors. We call them hallucinations. But it's doing enough things right and getting so much better, literally month by month, not year by year, but month by month. There's 100,000 brilliant people around the world making that happen.
Okay, well, we got to keep an eye on that. That's artificial intelligence. And we'll keep you posted. This is a Community Technology. Dave Burstein and Stu Reid every Wednesday, 5 to 6 p.m. on WHCR 90.3 FM. Check us out. This might learn something. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, all.